right, let's turn our attention then to the terror and torture essays that you read. Remember that you read 2 essays, and I told you that this would be the fodder for essay 4. So, essay 4, the prompt that I give you, and I'll probably give you that on Friday so you can start thinking and pre writing, and it's going to lead you to draw evidence from those 2 essays to make a claim about terror and torture. So let's walk through a discussion of the questions you answered yesterday in that Google form, and I've graded those in Google Classroom for you. The first question was, what is the thesis of Hendrik Hertzberg's argument, terror and torture? Is it implicit or explicit? So that was the first of the 2 essays, and you probably noticed that it is an implied thesis. So it builds to an overall point that you get by the end of the essay. And one way that you could describe that thesis is torture is unjust and hypocritical of our country, and it is now what we wish to become exemplary of. So how does the United States use torture? When terrorists were brought into Guantanamo Bay shortly after the attacks of 9/11, what was the justification for torture? Yeah, we needed to gather intelligence. So when you think about military intelligence, that's the ability of a country to gather chatter that is gleaned from other places, from communications, to know when an attack is planned, to know what other countries are planning against another country. And so, in order to get that information from a zealot, someone who is fervently devoted to their cause, they're not going to just readily give up that information. Or to put it in your terms, they're not going to snitch, right? They're not going to reveal what's happening. We're talking about people who were committed to their cause to the extent that they were willing to die in a major airliner. They're going to fly it into buildings, and they were going to die, lose their life for country. So some of the torture techniques might include waterboarding, and I talked about that to the table up front. Did you all think more about that after we discussed that yesterday? What is waterboarding? Yeah. So you're going to be restrained. You're going to have your head covered. They're going to drop water on you, drop at a time, maybe right between the eyes, until you eventually say something. There can be a point where you feel as if you're drowning. So it's like prolonged drowning after so many hours of being under waterboarding. And probably the lights will never be turned off. Now, I don't know if you've considered how disorienting it would be if you didn't have daylight and dark, right? We have a natural rhythm that our body gets into, and we know when it's daylight and when it's dark. What if you were in a prison, confined, with no food, no water, 24-hour perpetual light, and you were constantly being hit with drops of water? That's torture. Is it ethical? Do the ends justify the means? In other words, can you use an inhumane practice if the end result of getting intelligence for military purposes outweighs the inhumanity? That's exactly what I'm asking you to consider in this essay. To what lengths can you go to justify the use of inhumane treatment? Now, the next question says, give 2 pieces of supporting evidence from his essay to justify the thesis you identified. Here's a couple of ways you could have done that. In paragraph 8, Hertzberg wrote, over time, it probably ends up augmenting what it seeks to prevent if what it seeks to prevent is terror. And the second piece would be paragraph 9. It is the perfect opposite of what we like to think our country has stood for. It is surely not what we wish to become. So his position is, we're known as a humanitarian nation, right? We go into third world countries and provide relief to countries that are suffering at the hand of a despot or a dictator. And yet, when we are attacked, we turn to inhumane acts in order to get the military intelligence that we need. So his position is that we don't want to be that kind of nation. What's the thesis for the other essay? A case for torture. Is it implicit or explicit? So in Barzerik's essay, it has an explicit thesis of, and this is an exact sentence, Our reflex rejection of torture needs to be replaced by recognition that it can be a moral means of saving lives. So you should have noticed in these two essays that they are two opposing viewpoints. So the first one says it's inhumane and it's a practice that, as a nation, we don't want to be known for. But the other essay writer makes the argument that if it saves lives, then the ends justify the means. It would be the same kind of moral dilemma if you are morally opposed to, let's just make this a basic example, to lying. Like, I cannot tell a lie because it goes against my moral fiber. And let's say, for example, that someone knocks on your door and they hold a gun to your head and they say, is anyone home with you right now? Are you going to tell the truth? What if it's your sibling that's in the house? Are you morally opposed at that moment to lying? So do the ends justify the means? That's kind of the ethical dilemma that you can put yourself in. Supporting evidence for that, here's paragraph 9. First, the floodgates are already open. Torture is used widely despite the absolute legal prohibition against it. Wait a minute. The United States practices torture even though it's illegal? Is that true? How is it illegal? What does it violate? What kind of international guidelines govern what you can do and what you can't do? Say it again. The Geneva Convention. So it's a set of rules around war and what countries can and cannot do. And if you violate that, you can be subjected to some war crimes. Remember the Nuremberg trials shortly after World War II? Who was put on trial during the Nuremberg trials? The Nazis, right? And so they used as a defense. So, like the Gestapo, the SS officers who were carrying out orders at places like all the internment camps throughout Germany and Poland, they said, we were just carrying out orders. We were told to turn the gas on. We were told to murder Jews. Was that an adequate defense? No, they went to prison for life because of it, because they should have had enough moral fiber to know I'm not going to commit murder just because it's commanded by someone who's evil, right? And so that's not a justifiable defense. So there are rules that govern what you can and cannot do. This essay writer also supports his thesis in paragraph 7 when he poses, how can it be wrong to violate an even less important right, the right to physical integrity, by torturing the aggressor in order to save a life in the second scenario? In other words, it doesn't cross an ethical line because you're torturing someone who's already killed other people, right? They've kind of given up that right. They've given up their expectation of freedom or their expectation of not being tortured in that they have tortured other people. So that's the argument that essay writer is making. It says, how do the arguments presented in the two essays differ? So you automatically see that essay 1 is presented in a stack of outside sources of support in historical situations that pose counter arguments, whereas essay 2 begins with a situational argument followed by counter arguments, which the writer specifically argues later. So basically, it's the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning for the organizational pattern that the author uses. So those are answers. And so if you didn't answer those questions, now you know what the answers are to terror and torture. So you've got two essays that give you opposing viewpoints about terror and torture. You have to commit to a side for essay 4. And you're going to give a thesis statement either implied or explicitly and develop that with evidence. You're going to have to cite both of these. So here's what we're doing today. I'd like for you to open up a Google Doc and we're going to start essay 4 just in terms of setting it up for MLA format and doing a works cited. Okay, when you get that Google Doc launched, label it as essay 4. Make sure you're on Times New Roman 12 point and that you are on double line spacing. Okay, once you get that doc launched, you can go ahead and start with your setup. Don't forget to insert your header. You do that by inserting the page number first. And so the first page should look like that. Okay, once you get all of that, do a control enter to get to the next page, and we're going to set up your works cited. Control and enter gives you another page. Control enter. Oh, get what? The center right here where it says align, and then choose the one that says center. Okay, so the very last page of your essay for essay 4 is going to be a works cited. So center on that next page, works plural, because there's going to be 2 works that you're going to cite. Cited spelled with a C. So center that at the top, works cited. And then here are the 2 MLA formatted entries that I'm giving you for these 2 essays. So a couple of things to point out about doing a works cited. It's always going to be in alphabetical order. So that's why Bajeric comes before Hertzberg. You're always going to have author's last name, comma, first name, period. And this is not my rules. This is MLA's rules. If you don't do the periods, if you don't do the commas, it's incorrect. The next thing that comes in a work from an anthology, which that's what this is the title of the essay enclosed in quotation marks. So a case for torture, the period goes inside the quotation marks. Then you have the name of the work, which is the name of the book that it came from. It's going to be italicized because that's what you do to the title of a lengthy work. So it's short takes, model essays for composition, comma, edited by, because it's a book with an editor. And in this case, it's author's first name, then last name, comma, the publisher, comma, date of publication, comma, and then the pages that the essay appears on. And so plural pages is PP period, 325 and 328 period. Now,
how do you see where
just
Elizabeth Penfield?
Just type it all up and let it naturally wrap, and I'll show you how to get a hanging indent. So yours is going to look like that for right now, and I'll show you how to get the hanging indent. And so you'll notice that everything is the same because it's coming from the same book. So all of that's the same in both of those entries, right? Because it's coming from the same college writing anthology. It's just the author's name and the title of the essay that change.
So do we just copy that? All on the,
Yeah. So I'm giving you the citation for essay 4. In essay 5, you will develop your own citations for what sources you find. So you'll find your own sources and you'll write your own citations. Now, to get that hanging indent, in other words, to make that second line indent, if I put my cursor in front of Elizabeth Penfield and hit tab, it does the opposite of what I want it to do. If I put my cursor in front of it and watch what I'm doing here, I'm going to hit enter. Nothing happened. Then I hit tab and it tabs the hanging indent. I don't know if it works that way on a MacBook, but it should. Hit enter first and then tab. Did it work? Okay. So that's how you get what's called a hanging indent. Enter, tab. And there's no extra spaces between entries, no extra spaces between works cited and the first entry. So I've posted in Google Classroom a discussion about terror and torture. I suggest that you read through that, consider it carefully because it kind of leads you through an analysis of the 2 essays that you've read this week. And then down at the bottom, you've got the essay prompt. So this is kind of the cue for how you're going to develop a thesis statement, how you're going to organize this paper. So if you kind of noticed, all the essays in this class are deliberately organized in a way to build on skills. So essays 1 and 2 were all about your personal experience. Those were the easiest essays that we're going to write all year. And so we developed those in a way that's a little bit different from essay 3. Essay 3 moved you into that explicit thesis. This is likely going to have an explicit thesis as well. So as we move on, you're going to pull those skills along with you. So a good argument is going to draw on some narration, some description, some analysis of a text. Those are all skills that you've done in essays 1, 2, and 3. Another skill that you've added to that is being able to cite parenthetically source material. So you know how if you quote a piece of material, you're going to put a parenthetical citation and cite the source. Hear me well when I say this. If you put it in a direct quotation, you have to cite it. What if you paraphrase it? Do you have to cite it? Absolutely. If you paraphrase or summarize, you have to cite it. What's it called if you don't cite it? Plagiarism. What's it called if you put a parenthetical citation but there's no matching works cited? Plagiarism. What's it called if you include it on the works cited but there's no matching parenthetical citation? Right, plagiarism. So a lot of times students think, okay, plagiarism is when I just copy someone else's work and pretend like it's mine. Well, you can unintentionally plagiarize by committing these mistakes when it comes to citation. I don't want anybody to make that kind of mistake. If you make that mistake in this class, I'll give it back to you and say, hey, you need to redo it because you need to learn. When you get to college, the stakes are a little higher. Professors will say, this is plagiarism, you get a 0. Do you realize that you can get kicked out of college for plagiarism? There have been people who have been kicked out of a university. They lose all the credits that they've amassed because they have plagiarized works. So don't be guilty of it. You've got to know how to do it correctly. So that's why I'm so insistent that your works cited is accurate, that your formatting is accurate, and you've got this down. We will finish with MLA formatting at the end of this semester. Next semester, when you return for 112, if you choose to do so, you will learn APA formatting. All right, so we'll do a separate type of formatting for that. So here's the essay prompt. Search Hertzberg's Terror and Torture and Bazurik's A Case for Torture for a statement as a point to argue a yes, but position or to disagree with. Now, what do I mean with a yes, but position? It means you take a statement and you say, I agree in part with what this author says, but I want to qualify it by adding this to it. Does that make sense? It's a yes, but I see your point, but there's another point to it that you need to consider. That's what you're arguing in this paper. Either a yes, but, or you're going to disagree with the position. So here's the task for today. I've got it listed as pre-writing. I want you to go back and review those two essays. I want you to find a statement somewhere in those two essays. Now I want you to either highlight it, underline it, mark it, and that's going to be the point that you're going to use for a yes but position or a position to disagree with. It says use the experience of others in addition to that of your own to support your argument. All right. Does that mean you can use first person narration in essay 4? You can. If you need to develop it with some first person narration, you can. You should cite both essays at least once and include a works cited page. So in order to get an A on this essay, you've got to have the works cited. Guess what? I gave it to you yesterday, and I've included it again here in Google Classroom. So if you missed something, you can get it from here. And it means that you're going to have parenthesis for a parenthetical citation at least once for Bazurik and at least once for Hertzberg, and you're going to follow that citation format. Now that means if it's paraphrased, summarized, or a direct quotation. I suppose we need to talk about that as well. So kind of 3 levels of how to include source material. What's the difference between summary and paraphrase? Any idea? And I put them in that order for a reason, if that kind of clues you in.
Paraphrase is like a quicker version, and like it's a different, like they shorten up the summary.
Actually, you've got it in reverse. So say that in reverse. Paraphrase is a very careful retelling of an original, whereas summary is like a quicker version of it. So let me illustrate it for you. Summary and paraphrase are both in your own words, right? Direct quotation is the exact text of the original. So if I have a summary, let's say I've got a paragraph that is 8 sentences long. How long will my summary of an 8-sentence paragraph be? 2 to 3 sentences. So I might use 2 to 3 sentences for an 8-sentence original passage. If I paraphrase an 8-sentence paragraph, and it's a careful retelling in my own words, how many sentences will it be? 7 to 8. So in other words, I'm going to really carefully retell every sentence, but use my own words. So tell me when you would use summary and when you would use paraphrase. What would be the difference between using those two? What kind of material would you be working with? What am I doing if I want to summarize something? I want to shorten it, and I just want to take the general idea from it. So when I want to paraphrase very carefully, sentence by sentence. Like in a research paper when I'm dealing with what kind of material? Yeah, but very detailed information, right? If it's so important that I want to carefully retell it every bit, then I'm going to do it sentence by sentence. Which are you going to use more frequently? By far, you're going to use summary the most. Paraphrase is rarely used because rarely are you going to have a passage that you just need to retell in your own words, sentence by sentence. Direct quotation is the exact text of the original. How frequently are you going to use direct quotations? Are you use it more or less than summary? Less. So you should only have about 15% of your paper as a direct quotation. If you have more than 15% of a 1,000-word essay as a direct quotation, then you've not used enough summary. Because when you use a direct quotation, what you're saying is the original author said it in such a way that I cannot recast it in my own words and retain the same meaning. So you use a direct quotation when the language is so precise and so specific that there's no way that you can recast it into your own words. That's how you decide whether you're going to use a direct quotation or a summary. But I've been around long enough that I know how you decide when to use a direct quotation. You use a direct quotation when you need to lengthen your paper, right? You drop in a really long quotation and that makes your paper longer. Break yourself of that habit. Only use direct quotations when it truly, truly, truly is so specific and so precise that you can't redo it into your own words. So theoretically, for this paper, which is 750 words, 2 essays, you could have parenthetical citations with no direct quotations. How would that happen? How could you have an essay 4 with parenthetical citations but no direct quotations? If you use summary or paraphrase, right? You could use summary and paraphrase and not a direct quotation and still have the 2 citations. Now,
if we've done that, how would we do that? Like,
okay.
So would you say?
Like, how do you write it?
Yeah.
So like if all my information comes from the essay in my own words, no quotation marks, just like that. So that would be a summary. Let me move the magic carpet.
After I.
So do you put quotation marks around it? Oh. So you don't put quotation
No,
marks?
sir.
Skill, that was skill.
Okay, so no quotation marks here. Why? It's not direct. So the only time I use direct quotation marks is if it's word for word the original. So no quotation marks. No quotation marks. Use quotation marks. Right? So that's the difference. So up until this point, like with the kite runner, you use direct quotations because that's what I told you to do. All right? So you were doing one skill. Now I'm opening the door and saying, let's try out another skill. Because when you do the research paper for essay 5, you're going to have summary, paraphrase, and direct quotation in that essay because it's 1,000 words. And so it's going to take a little more effort to do that. And brace yourself, I don't give you the sources. You find them yourself on essay 5. So here I'm giving you the sources. I'm holding your hand. Essay 5, I'm going to turn loose in your hand.
But
I'm
it's
look-
1,000 words.
And it's 1,000 words. And I'm going to let you find your own sources using the virtual library.
You get a pick up topic and I say top 5.
You do.
Like any like
It has to be argumentative. So it has to be an arguable topic, something that someone might reasonably disagree with. Okay, one other thing here that I want to make sure everyone understands. Summary, do you have a citation? Yes. You include a citation. Paraphrase, do you include a citation? Yes. Direct quotation, obviously.
like what's the citation on that part right there?
This is what I'm calling the citation. So technically that's called a parenthetical citation.
So for the bottom part of below mine, so you want us to, in our own words, say the part we want, and then period, then say my information comes.
No. I just wrote that down as a placeholder.
Okay, I was about to say.
So like I would say something like torture is inhumane. And then I would put that.
Okay.
If that idea is not my own idea, I gleaned it from another source, I have to cite it. Now, there are some things in this world that you do not have to cite. So if an author writes in his paper, and this is going to be such an elementary, oversimplified example, but I want you to understand it. If the author writes, the sky is blue, I do not have to write, the sky is blue, open up parenthesis, Bergerac 312. Everybody knows. So if it's general knowledge, you don't have to cite it. But if it's an idea that you didn't come up with on your own until you read the source, you have to cite it. And that's where so many people plagiarize. because they read a source, they've got this idea that they have taken from someone else, and then they just pass it off as their own. There are really no original thoughts in the world. Even Solomon wrote that in the Old Testament. He said there's nothing new under the sun. That's what he meant by that. If you've thought it, someone else has already thought it. If you've experienced it, somebody else has already
So
experienced
even
it.
though that I knew that torture is inhumane, I still have to.
If that is the primary idea that you gleaned from that article, then yes, you would cite it. But that's kind of an elementary example too. You're probably not going to say that as a citation. Okay.
Rough draft.
Okay. So here's the other bit of good news. I'm giving you the essay prompt today so you can do the pre-writing by finding the statement with which you're going to say a yes, but, or a disagree. Begin your pre-writing today. Work on it tomorrow after the master exam. Make sure you've got a formative draft ready by Tuesday.
Wait, ready? Like Tuesday
Ready.
night?
Yeah, Tuesday night, ready for me to look at. Because one of the hangups we have with Wednesday is I know the Veterans Day program is at 9, but it'll involve some of you. Like band will probably be pulled out. If you're speaking at it, if you're helping with it, you'll probably be pulled out before 9 o'clock. So Wednesday's kind of going to be an odd day because of the Veterans Day program, and that's okay. So I want the draft on Tuesday. Those of you who are in class will get it back on Wednesday. Those of you who are out for the Veterans Day program will get it back on Thursday. Summative draft then will be on Sunday at midnight. So this is in Google, this is in Moodle. All right. These have all been good questions. What other good questions do you have for me?
What were you saying about the alphabetical order thing? Like the
Okay.
quotation that we need?
No. The works cited. So this is a good question. Everybody listen. When you construct a works cited, it's going to be alphabetized based on whatever you entered first. Now, one of the things we've not talked about yet, which we'll talk about for essay 5, is that sometimes an essay that you use or an article that you use doesn't have a named author. So what do? You start with the title of the article or the title of the essay. You would alphabetize it in that list based on the first word of the title. So sometimes you'll have things that have have authors and sometimes you don't. Let me show you. So remember Purdue OWL, that's where you go to find all of this. So I'm going to go to the MLA guide and let's see if I can find you an example of a works cited.
What'd you say this website's called?
It's Purdue University and it's OWL, OWL for Online Writing Lab. Okay, so Kamari right here. So that's a work with an author, that's a work without an author, that's a work with an author, and so you would alphabetize those. Does that make sense?
Their last name.
Whatever comes first in that entry. And so whatever comes first in that entry on the works cited is what you include in the parenthetical citation. So if you have an author's last name, it's the author's last name. If you just had the title, then in parentheses you would put the title for the parenthetical citation. But you won't have to know that for this essay.